In the Battle to Save Celtic series so far, we've heard from members of the old board, members of the new board, journalists, supporters groups and many others as we cover that unique time in Celtic's history from all angles. Today, however, we're speaking with one of the few people who had hands-on experience of working with both the old board and the Fergus McCann regime in his role at the Celtic View, where he would eventually become editor of the club's official newspaper. Andrew Smith was at Celtic between November 1989 and January 1998, giving him a front row seat during arguably the most turbulent times in modern Celtic history. And I'm delighted to be joined by him here on the Celtic Exchange today. Andrew, welcome to the show. We're going to get into it all in some detail, but what's your initial summary of those 8 years or so at Celtic Park during those times?
It was obviously one of the least successful periods in the club's history, and it was clearly the most traumatic period in the club's history. But that was quite an intoxicating mix in its own way, because people will never experience what we experienced, and especially because when you were at the Celtic View in that time, there wasn't really any of the barriers. There wasn't anything. You met, you were down among the players. Sometimes the odd time we travelled in the team bus, you would know the board members. There wasn't that kind of corporate structure where you were isolated or you were further away. So you really did get an insight. You really were. You did feel like an insider without necessarily knowing everything that was happening inside, but you were just there. You were often a fly in the wall.
Do you think ultimately it was different times? Obviously the modern game has changed, the modern footballer has changed, and even from a Celtic point of view, the players are away up in Lennoxtown, and there's, I don't know if a disconnect is the word, but they're certainly not as close to the fans and, dare I say, those at the club, as they maybe once were.
Yeah, definitely. And it was beginning to change. It was even beginning to change by the time I left in 1998. But even the last day, for instance, that I was there, I had to go down and do the programme notes for Wim Jansen. So it was like, where's Wim? Oh, right, he's in the dressing room with Murdo. So I just walk in the dressing room and say, Wim, can I get you for a couple of minutes for the programme notes? And by the way, I'm leaving, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily happen that way. It's like, I'm sure there's appointed times where the guys get, like the manager now or whatever, there's not that kind of looseness that there was then. And that fosters a kind of sense that we're in it together and you're not them and us.
You mentioned Wim Jansen there. He was one of, I don't know, I need to check the number, about half a dozen managers during the 90s, during your time. You've seen off a few, between Billy McNeil, Liam Brady, Lou Macari, Tommy Burns, Wim, and then obviously Joe Venglos after. Probably missed somebody there, but who knows. Did you have any particular relationships with any of those managers, some better than others to deal with from an editor point of view?
I actually think I had pretty good relations with all of them, but the one ultimately I was closest to, and it might seem mad, was Lou Macari. Lou really treated us like we were part of it. He was amazing to me personally, in terms of like he wanted me to even go on the team bus, like things like that. He always, and ultimately part of that was his downfall. Because I phoned him up during just before he got the sack, and I said, look, we don't have any front page, we don't have any splash for this week's View. I said, can you help me out? Is there anything happening? Because this is the summer of 94. He said, well, I'll tell you, we've just been invited to the Far East to play in Malaysia, and we're going to take it up. And it was like, oh, brilliant. Celtic head east was the front page. And then when it came out on the Wednesday, I got the phone call from Fergus. What is this? It's like, I said, Lou told me. They used it in court, and he's unfair dismissal claim to say that he was acting above and beyond where he should have done.
Oh dear. I think you've maybe said that's been the ultimate downfall for Lou Macari, but ultimately it wasn't working out, was it? I think he spent a lot of his time down south, and the relationship between him and Fergus McCann and Fergus and all the managers, to be fair, was quite fraught at that point. And I think maybe the writing was already in the wall for Lou Macari. Would that be fair?
Yeah, well, Lou was inherited by a new regime. How many managers ever survive long term when they're not the picks of someone who takes over a club or buys out a club?
Yeah,
it's just never a good position to find yourself in as a manager. So it was always precarious. But do you know what I do remember? The timing was still strange. where he lost his job, because you know what we had in the View? We had pictures of Colin Calderwood with a Celtic strip on, because he signed him the day that he got the sack, and Fergus managed to renounce
to
unsign him, which was a poor decision, because Colin Calderwood would have been a good signing for Celtic. But we had all the pictures. It was like the Mo Johnson pictures of old.
And maybe we'll cover that as well, just as we go through. I didn't know that at all. That's interesting in itself. So let's take it back to your first days in the role. So you're November 1989, as you mentioned. At that time, Celtic have just about at that time won the Scottish Cup. They beat Rangers 1-0 in what became known as the Joe Miller final, May 1989. And maybe the perception from the outside looking in was that everything was rosy in the garden at that time. Was that your own feelings in your early weeks and months at the club?
No, I think people knew that it was on the slide. As it would turn out, I would say the 89-90 season was the nadir of my Celtic watching days. A dreadful, dreadful team. It was painful to watch, because you grow up idolising Billy McNeill. It was painful to watch the kind of waning powers, because of the kind of waning situation that surrounded the whole club. But if you think about it, the week I started, they just lost at East End Park to Dunfermline, and my first game was the old press box at Ibrox. I can't tell you how exciting it was. Like, to just, because I never thought I was getting the job or whatever. Like, and then I'll get phoned up for Jack, can you start tomorrow? Because things had happened. And so I walked in, and I was the only person that was working on the editorial side at the Celtic View because of circumstances. I sat there. I'd never been a journalist. I'd worked for the Strathclyde University, Strathclyde Telegraph, but I had actually fallen out with him because I used to do reviews of bands, but I also decided to do a story about CS gas canisters. That, if you remember, there was a Celtic Hibs game at Easter Road where Celtic supporters let off the CS gas canisters. I think they'd got them from when they went to Dortmund. You know, there was a lot of kind of army so they'd brought back all these CS gas canisters. This was long before the old pyros of today and whatever.
Right.
And it stopped the game for about 20 minutes. It was a really serious, but I thought Celtic sports had been harshly treated, so I wrote this big treatise, this thundering kind of comment piece. Strathclyde Telegraph refused to publish it, so I said, I'm not writing for you again. So that was the extent of my journalism.
That was you censored at an early
Censored at an early age. Not for the last time.
No, indeed. So you move from there, you take the role. You mentioned Jack. So Jack is, of course, Jack McGinn. So let me ask a question, Andrew, about the board at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong here. So the board was Jack McGinn, Kevin Kelly, who was vice chairman, Cymru Secretary Chris White, Jimmy Farrell and Tom Grant. Just the 5 board members, I think, at that time. Have I missed anybody?
That would have been, because there was no Michael Kelly then.
Not yet, and we'll certainly get to Michael Kelly. I was going to ask, I've asked you about your perceptions at the time. You know, were things on the slide, or were things okay after the Joe Miller final? I've read somewhere that from a board point of view, they were saying, what's all the hassle here? We've just won the cup. We won the league not long ago. Let's all just calm down. But do you think those 5 figures mentioned, do you think they truly believed everything was okay? Were they burying their head in the sands, or did they realise there was some stuff coming down the line?
Well, you got to remember, what does 89 say to you about football?
Hillsborough
changed everything. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, because of the Ibrox disaster, Rangers had resolved that Hillsborough, you know, what was to come in football from Hillsborough wasn't an issue for Rangers, because they already had their all-seater stadium.
Yeah. We're going to get into that, and I'm going to ask your thoughts on the various things that happened at the time. You know, proposals from Brian Dempsey about Rob Royston, the Cambuslang dream, inverted commas, dream, the ultimate redevelopment of the stadium. We'll get to all of that, and yeah, of course, that's as a result of Hillsborough and the subsequent Taylor report that dictated that all top flight clubs in the UK had to have all-seater stadia by, I think, August 1994. And of course, that put huge pressure on the board. Before we do get to that, what about your relationship with those guys? So all of a sudden you're at the Celtic View, you weren't sure it was going to happen, but now you're in the hot seat as such. Do you work close with any board members? Do they dictate what the editorial is at any given time? How hands-on were those figures with what you ended up writing?
Yeah, you met them back and forth, but there was certain things they would want to do. Like, and I got on pretty well with all of them. Jack, full disclosure, I was a really long-serving altar boy in St Mary's in Lark Hall, and the parish priest, who's a really close family friend, was Jack's brother. So he was my reference. So, like, nepotism begins, So Jack knew about me. He knew my character. He knew how much a Celtic supporter I was, because his brother used to give me, if I served in the altar on a Friday night, he would say, "Where is Celtic playing tomorrow?" "Oh, we're at Kilmarnock, Father." "Oh, here's a couple of £2 for, your bus fare. Even the supporters bus, that you'll pay your..." So he knew my credentials. He knew that I was a good Celtic supporter. And Jack McGinn's a good man. Mm-hmm. Jack McGinn's a good man. Tom Grant, good ordinary soul. Like, you didn't necessarily believe they should have been board members and what you consider a kind of high profile, high pressure situation. I mean, Chris White was in another planet. Chris White, people used to say, he'd rather be going yachting or boating. He was a rower with his private school. So he came for that whole private school environment. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, the little people. I have to deal with the little people.
Is that how you felt? So Tom Grant was in that very seat. I think we spoke to Tom in part 4 of this series. Tom was excellent. People might agree or disagree with how Tom and the board done things, but as a fella and a regular guy and a Celtic fan, he's up there with anyone else. I thought he was a very decent guy and very kind with his time here. Do you feel Chris White and maybe others were a bit more aloof towards the fans?
That's the massive understatement. Chris White just didn't understand. It's like inherited wealth. You don't necessarily know what to do with it. And Chris White was an inherited position.
His father was Desmond White, former chairman as well.
Former chairman, and my mum used to curl her lips when he was ever mentioned. So I grew up resenting the Whites and Kellys. Kevin Kelly, I'm going to say this, and I didn't dislike the guy, but I used to describe him as the world's first human invertebrate, because he just didn't have a backbone, right? He just did not have a backbone. My God.
How does a figure like that end up as the chairman, not just a part of the board? Kevin Kelly ultimately became chairman of Celtic, didn't he, for a time?
Because he was a Kelly.
Just because of the name?
Although Jack, you've got to remember, Jack was the chairman then, and he wasn't from the family dynasties. Yeah. But he'd worked his way up because Jack had been at Celtic. He'd started the Celtic View in 1965. So Jack, by the early 90s, you're talking quarter a century. Mm-hmm. He'd been in and around there. Jack famously, one of his great kind of commercial ideas was to have a Sunday street market in the car park at Celtic Park. Okay. And I was like, "Hey, have you heard of the Barras, Jack? Just about quarter mile down the road." Not one of the great successful commercial ventures.
Did that happen?
I thought they tried it. They tried it. But of course, the fact that you don't know anything about it, it may have happened, but it didn't last.
Maybe that tells its own story. I'll ask a question which may become relevant further into the piece. Andrew, you mentioned that Jack vouched for you and you got the job and he knew how big a Celtic fan you were. I also worked at Celtic for a time, and I remember specifically getting asked during an interview, how important do you feel it is, or how important is it to be a Celtic fan to work here? Do you think it was important to allow you to do your role in the most effective way possible? Yeah. Particularly at those times?
It changed. It changed over the course of my 8 years, because it almost became a black mark against your name being a Celtic supporter when Celtic got far more corporate. It was like, oh, no. Emotion gets in the way. And I know we'll talk about that. Fergus McCann. It wasn't just Fergus, it was all those executive positions. None of them were Celtic supporters. They hadn't a clue. But that's different. You don't need to be a Celtic supporter, if you're a stadium manager. You need to know about the specifics of stadium management. Yeah. Which are not unique to Celtic. They're universal. But if you're writing about Celtic, I used to say to them, Do you think I would get a job in Hair Monthly if I wasn't interested in hairdressing? Because they used to say, "Oh, that's not about, you have to be," and it was very intriguing that because we were close to the guys in the Rangers News,
Okay.
and because I used to me and the other editor used to phone each other because we were almost like two people who really understood all the things we were going through, and no other people understood about the lack of kind of sometimes the obstacles put in your way and whatever. But so many of the Rangers News, the guys didn't support Rangers, but seeing the Celtic View, we always it was unheard of not to have a Celtic sport.
I mean, you're obviously writing articles directly to the fans at times about the fans, about the club, and I think I agree with you. If you're working on, I don't know, stadium or infrastructure or on the financial side of the business, it doesn't matter a jot if you're a Celtic fan, but you're at the emotional end, and for some people the Celtic View was the only place they would go to for their club news, so there had to be a level of authenticity about that, surely.
Yeah, and knowledge, and a knowledge base, because you could dip into it. And I must say, my knowledge base really ramped up, and I loved that. I loved becoming what I would consider becoming an authority on Celtic, and that was only through working at the View. Know that I didn't know the history before. My mum would talk about biting her fingernails, praying for a draw, going to see Celtic in the 50s. And she would tell us about it, and we would stay up late nights sometimes when the telly finished and the wee dot came, as people don't understand now. And she would go to the bookshelf and get You'll Never Walk Alone, Jerry McNee's book, or she would get The Glory and the Dream, and we would sit there and read. We'd just chat Celtic. It's just quite an emotional thing about it now, but so they were my experiences of growing up, and she would also tell me about how the Kellys and the Whites, what I mean? So this whole notion, I only keep coming back to that because people think as if you're like, as if I was endorsing these people. No, we all have to work for the guys at the Record and the Sun. They used to sneer about Pravda and all that. I said, oh yeah, when Robert Maxwell was raiding your pensions, were you writing about it in the Record? When Murdoch was doing ABC, did you ever write one critical word in the Sun? Understand that nobody openly criticises the higher powers, the higher ups.
Interesting you mentioned Pravda. It's almost like you've been looking at my notes, Andrew, but
sorry.
We'll get there just shortly. You mentioned Michael Kelly. Of course, he's very relevant to this whole story. He arrives at Celtic in May 1990 alongside Brian Dempsey. Two big characters in their own way, absolutely. Tell us about your initial interactions with them. So Brian Dempsey comes from a property development background. Yeah. Michael Kelly, of course, from the PR side of things and former Lord Provost of Glasgow. So what was your early dealings with those two?
I don't really think, I'll be honest, I don't really think I had any. There was two of us at the View then. Donald Cow, who was an experienced journalist. I mean, I'd started only to be the editorial assistant. It just so happened that there was no editor. That position was vacant, so I was there for about a month. They got some old boy out of retirement, and it's terrible, I can't remember his name, because I was green in more ways than one, so the editor was the guy who would deal with executives, if you like. It would deal with the directors, so that would have been Donald's gig. Okay. And I was dealing more with players. All I remember about that is the picture of the two of them taken when they joined. That's all I remember.
Yeah, it was a kind of Celtic Smiles Better cake or something.
Yeah, there was something of that nature. But I never really had any dealings until much later. Until Fergus's takeover, I never really had any dealings with Brian Dempsey. I didn't have many dealings with Brian Dempsey at all. I had a lot more with Michael Kelly, sadly.
So let's stay on that then. What was your experiences like? I was going to ask, obviously you've got a journalistic background, you're then, as I say, ultimately become editor of the Celtic View. Michael Kelly's from a PR background, so they're in similar worlds. I was going to ask, would his experiences help you in any way, or actually was it the opposite? Did it hinder what you were trying to do?
They weren't. I don't know if people really think that anybody's got time to keep telling somebody else how to do their job, even if you wanted to. But what I will say, and to his great credit, when Donald Cow come in, he says, look, there's a lot of disquiet about the governance of this club. We can't, that's what we get, the letter. That's the letters we receive. you've got to let us loosen up a wee bit and stop just being a kind of puffy PR page, the letters page. And Jack said, I agree. And so, see if you want to look back at that.
Yeah.
Like that time, there's a lot of critical letters start to appear.
And they were allowed to come
They
through.
were allowed to come, and Jack allowed that. And then it maybe, when Jack's power kind of waned or whatever, the power structures changed, then that maybe, and people were getting a bit more sensitive to the fact that the growing issue with their positions, you know, then people kind of, they kind of close in on themselves, don't they? But it was, we did it, and we changed the view. Now, I say this without fear of contradiction. We changed the view, and we changed it in ways that people had never considered, because we were so bad in the 89-90 season. I started a column. In my kind of arrogance, I thought I should have been a columnist, so I introduced a column to the programme, because Donald let me do the programme, was my baby, and he would do the view. So it was called Scoring Points. That's where I thought, yeah. So I started a column in January 1990 saying, not only is the league over, but I said, you wonder if Celtic will finish second, right? And Doug Bailey for the Sunday Post picked it up, and it was a back page splash in the Sunday Post. Billy brought him in. He's off. What the he's saying? You know what I mean? What, you can't write that. You can't write that. And then he ostracised Charlie Nicholas, and he brought him back in April. And Charlie, as Charlie did, he come back in the flamboyance and the flair and everything that was missing for Celtic, like that he brought back in those games. And it's like, why is Charlie Nicholas not been playing? This was my match report. That's why is Charlie Nicholas scored 2 goals. I think they beat the Fern or something like that. Again, Billy gets us in. Do you want to put the scaffold out in the middle, centre circle for me? What the hell are you doing? This is a Celtic View. You know, things like that. And there had been this kind of jolly kind of, oh yeah, you're just like a Chumley Warner kind of, you know, they all kind of play up and play well, boys. You know, that kind of stuff. And we changed it. And I also changed it, even the programme. So we used to do this introduction of it. So it was Motherwell. And there was fans protesting against Tommy McLean. So I would do a wee kind of intro. Here's where this club is, our visitors are. And I said, it's a horror show for Motherwell, Got a phone call off their chief executive. I'm going to sue you. I've never seen that in a programme. I've never seen. I said, is any untrue? But you can't write that. Why can't you write that? We changed it. And I say that, and this isn't me just bashing Rangers. The Rangers news was the real Pravda. We were never the real Pravda.
Let's stay on Pravda then. So I was going to ask that question. So a lot of the fans would refer to the Celtic View as Pravda, and for anyone who's unaware, Pravda was the Soviet newspaper of the Communist Party, and it was just a real tool for propaganda. You know, it was just pushing the message that you know, the communists wanted to be pushed at that time. Do you feel then, and from what you're saying, Andrew, that maybe was the case, but over time yourself and Donald were able to chip away at that? I mean, playing devil's advocate, I can see Billy McNeil's point of view, you know, if you're coming out and slating his team from an official capacity, but I can also see your point of view from an integrity point of view of a writer. You're seeing it with your own eyes, other fans are seeing it, so you maybe feel that you need to reflect that mood amongst the fan base. Yeah,
it's a difficult line to tread. I think we were chipping away, and then you get the likes of Terry Cassidy's coming in and all that, and I suppose he was a kind of mini Trump figure. You know, there was one of them that he said, right, I'm going to go after Hugh Keevins, I'm going to go after this paper, I'm going to go. Donald had to go over there, and it was like 9 people he was getting tore into, and it was just like a Trump rant. I remember going over to see him one day, and it was like, you know, Chick Murray and Greg's girl, and I was like, oh, you little boy, you know, it was like that kind of thing. What a weirdo he was.
Yeah, I was keen to speak to Terry Cassidy. I think he's still around, but he's pretty elderly now. But he had a part to play in that story, and he's often forgotten about. And maybe it's something we'll revisit as part of this series. I was going to ask specifically, Andrew, did you ever feel truly conflicted in your role? Is there maybe things that you had to put out there that you just didn't want to put out there, whether it was in the programme or the Celtic View?
Oh, often.
Yeah,
often. Trying to justify mean, Michael Kelly said that Celtic lost its soul when it was taken over. It was just another club. And my family were all season book holders at that point under the old board. And it was like, see, in the lovely family dynasty that they had, their season tickets went up 46% in the space of 2 years. That's the grand old club that was lost. Mm. They didn't do that under Fergus.
Would you ever find yourself writing things in the View? I don't know, the View used to always come out on a Wednesday, didn't it?
It did, aye.
Would you write things that were out in the View on a Wednesday and then be down the pub with mates on a Friday and get dug up for anything? Would your mates say, how can you put that there? How can you write that?
Well, you know what happened. I mean, we're jumping, but it's so germane to this. Was the day that the Canvas Lang, we had to take Kevin Kelly. Look, as if you're asking me that, this is the prime example.
Go for it.
So we had to do the 5 pages on Canvas Lang. Here we come.
Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams. We're looking at the picture going, look at this Egypt. Like Julie Andrews and the Sound of Music, you know.
Uncontaminated land, potentially.
Uncontaminated land, yeah, like toxic wastelands in more ways than one. So by that fallen apart, even before the View came out, it fallen apart because the Swiss bank, Geffen, they had said, and I don't know what happened, and I've a certain sympathy with Michael Kelly because I'm sure they weren't going public with that thinking that they were going to pull the plug. And I think it was 20 million they were going to put in. It was essentially like a hedge fund, you know, investment. And I think Geffen got spooked by the negative reaction because people tried to phone them up, and these people don't like any transparency.
Yeah. There's footage, I've seen it just in the last few nights when I was researching. It's an exec or somebody for Geffen, kind of guy with glasses, and I think they've doorstopped him, and he's just all at sea. He's very uncomfortable, and I don't think they expected the level of scrutiny that getting involved with Celtic brings.
Yeah, so by that Tuesday night, and this was also the same night of the boycott, again, the game against Kilmarnock.
So that's the 1st of March 1994.
So I'm sitting in the office, and I said to Meryl, I've had it. I'm going to resign, but I want to go out in a blaze of glory. So I phoned my friend, God rest his soul, he only died recently, Ewan Graham, and the Scottish Sun, and I said, I want to spill my guts. I'll spill my guts as long as you put me in the back page because I don't want to be tucked inside if this is the end of my career. So he said, no, I'll do it. And I thought, what can I make sure that I get a good talky Sun headline? I said, 2 more weeks of this, I'll need to change my name to Goebbels. Again, another reference to like authoritarian powers. So sure enough, they did. 2 more weeks of this, I'll need to change my name to Goebbels. And I said...
So that was the headline?
That was the headline. Yeah,
right.
I knew, like, I was quite chuffed with myself because I knew if I said that to him, that would be used as the headline.
And this is before that week of...
That was the night of the... As it turned out, I only got a little kind of, I've had it with Celtic kind of thing.
Okay.
Right? On the back page because of the picture of the fan sitting there on his own, and it was like the desolate wastelands of Celtic Park because there was only 8,000 or 9,000 there or whatever. So I didn't quite get the publicity that I wanted. But I drove home that night. My mother hadn't long died, and my sister hadn't long given birth, and so it was a really emotional time. And she was still living at home as a single mother. And I drove home and I says, I've just obliterated my career. I'll be sacked tomorrow. Dad, I just wanted you to know. I'll be sacked, but I've got this form for VSO. I want to go and swim with dolphins in Belize. You know,
what was VSO?
Volunteer Services Overseas.
Okay.
So I wanted to go and teach in Belize, and I thought I'd be swimming with dolphins.
What a career change that
Yeah. So, and I also knew the next morning I was in the High Court. I was in the jury of a High Court case. So I knew they wouldn't be able to get to me.
Right. Just jury duty?
Jury duty.
Right.
It turned out the court case was an incredibly complicated court case. It lasted a month.
Okay.
So I was having to go in, as it turned out, the whole board changed. So I was having to go in at 6 a.m, work to 9. I was the only person in the whole jury that worked during that time, but it was such a dramatic time. I couldn't just let it go.
You mentioned that you'd reached out to Ewan Graham.
Ewan Graham, yeah.
What drove you to do that? So what were you looking to achieve? Were you just fed up with the way it was going on? Did you have...
Yeah, it was just two fingers to them. I knew they were going to... And we weren't owned... The Celtic View had been sold off by the old board because it was loss-making.
Mm-hmm.
It'd gone down to... I mean, when I started, I think it was like 20-odd thousand. It'd gone down to 7,000 or 8,000 sales.
Right.
It's actually more than some of the papers that like get now. But like, so they said, anything that was losing money, poof, bump it. So this First Press Publishing, run by like a kind of former Fleet Street editor, who also published a Scottish football magazine, so they were keen to get into this market.
Can you just explain that model? So Celtic no longer own the View, but you're still paid by Celtic to write for the View?
Yeah.
That's a bit unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, it was hellish, because you're ultimately trying to serve two masters. Because, and it got really bad, because Donald did a 2-part interview we were playing Manchester United in one of these testimonials or whatever, and Donald managed to get 2 hours with Alex Ferguson, so 2-hour interview, and so he split it up into 2 parts, 1 week, the next week. First Press, because they were also a football agency, so they did, so it was Keith Jackson, Gordon Waddle, people would know all the people, Mark Guidi, people would know all the people that come through those doors, that they were all the writers there. That's how they all started. So, but they sold the second part of the Ferguson interview to the Record of the Sun a week before it came out in the Celtic View.
Right.
So it didn't work.
There's a lot of conflict there, isn't there? Just different motivators for different people.
Didn't work. So I phoned up, when I became the editor, I phoned up, and this was still happening, and the players went on strike from speaking to the View. And I phoned up Steve Sampson. I says, look, Steve, I can't serve two masters. This isn't working. And he said, and this is what he said, listen, you little philosophical get your arse into our office and we'll talk about this, because they had an office in town, so I had to leave Celtic Park and go into town to do the production of the View every Monday.
And when, so the whole thing about the View is it's the, by the club for the fans. If you're not getting access to players amongst others, your job is effectively redundant. It just, any USP that the Celtic View had at that time is gone, isn't it?
Do you know what we used to do? We used to start going to the press conferences and then taking bits that weren't used in the press, taking the kind of cast-offs. That was Merrill's idea, genius. Yeah. So we still had a presence of the players in the View, and we begged Paul to kind of reconsider. Paul McStay, sorry. Did Paul McStay to reconsider, and we said, you just can't keep doing this or the whole model breaks down. But, I mean, it caused us even problems into Fergus McCann, because Fergus didn't buy us back immediately. It took a couple of months to buy us back. And within those months buying him back, I did an interview with him, which he gets sued for. Because he said the old board lied. They stonewalled me. They lied. Right? And he gets sued as the writer. Sorry, he gets sued as the person saying it. I get sued as the writer. I get sued as the editor. And the publisher gets sued, First Press Publishing. Sued by the Kellys. Okay. Sued by the Kellys.
And how did that play out?
So I was looking forward to my day in court. I was really looking forward to my day in court, because I thought, yeah, I'll get one of those snatch pictures, that'll be walking out the court and I'll be telling everything that the old board were like. Except Michael Kelly came up with a genius idea, because Fergus had met this lawyer who was working for the club before he took over, Elspeth.
Yeah.
So he called
the future Mrs. McCann.
Future Mrs. McCann, now the ex-Mrs. McCann. But so he called up Elspeth against Fergus to say that this stuff that Fergus was saying wasn't true. They weren't stonewalling him, they weren't stopping him. So he settled out of court. The only time he ever settled out of court. When I thought I was going to get, I was quite looking forward to it, because I thought, I've got nothing to lose here. But, so, we all had to pay our legal fees. Fergus wouldn't pay my legal fees, even though I was just conveying his words. He'd seen the piece, although I think they changed. I get sued because there's tabloid guys. I said they discredited Old Board, right? And they changed it to disgraced.
Right.
Now that's a very different tone. I wouldn't write disgraced directors. It's just no in my vocabulary. I was over in Canada at the time, faxing it back because I was over with Celtic in the Toronto Cup, Hamilton Cup. Sorry, we Lou and all that. You know, it was his last. They won, and it was such a wee plastic trophy. They were throwing it about in the back of the bus, and the wee man come off there. It was like so tin pot. Oh, so I get sick, and Fergus wouldn't pay him my legal costs, and Steve Sampson, just to curry favour with Fergus, says, I'll pay them. It was like something like £3,000.
So they got covered, but not by the club?
No, by the club. Fergus wouldn't do it. He says, nah, you're not an employee. Why would I do it? Because I was doing your bidding.
Yeah.
Which says everything about Fergus. No sentiment.
And we're going to cover Fergus, of course, just a wee bit from now, Andrew. Well, we're talking about the stadium, so the Cambuslang Stadium plan, and that's obviously a hugely important part of the story. So just to re-stress, Celtic and all clubs, all UK top flight clubs, were under pressure to have all-seater stadia by August 1994. Brian Dempsey, of course, he was only in for a short time, May 1990 to October 1990. His big proposal, his big plan was the Rob Royston project, where they would set up, train lines and different access routes in this, wonderful stadium there. But that wasn't to be, and Brian was ousted by Michael Kelly and Chris White in October 1990. And then I think it's April 1992 where the club revealed these big plans. And anyone that wants to can dig out the pages of the Celtic View at the time. They're around, they're online, and I've seen them in the last few days. And there's lines along the following. Let me read them out. The headlines. So in April 1992, as I say, quote unquote, Celtic's 100 million dream home. Yeah. Paradise found. Yeah. World's greatest stadium for world's greatest fans, etc., etc. The picture of Michael Kelly with the arms outstretched.
No. That's the different one. That's Cambuslang. So this is staying at Celtic Park.
April 92?
April 92. They were still staying at Celtic Park.
I thought that was the Cambuslang dream.
No, Cambuslang dream was November 92.
Okay.
So within 4 months, they realised they couldn't stay at Celtic Park and had to go to Cambuslang. But then the photograph of Kelly. So Cambuslang was something they worked on for, I suppose, 18 months. Mm-hmm. But the guts kind of 14 months.
So just on that, so I understand the nature of...
And by the way, I never wrote any of those. Like, that's Donald, that's on Donald, right. All that crap.
Passing the buck, I see. I understand the nature of PR at the time. There was a lot of pressure on the club. Michael Kelly, the quote-unquote PR guru that was part of the board then, keen to maybe to keep the fans at bay, and to kind of put out a positive message. Yeah. And obviously, as you say, they spent some 18 months on Cambuslang. So I would like to think that they genuinely believed in the project, but did they? Or was it just something to kick things into the long grass? Did they think that was ever going to happen?
I can only assume they must have. If you remember, maybe you're too young, but sorry, you're obviously too young, but that the one that you're all reading out, they allowed the supporters to come in. So it was like, you know how you see, here's a development and we'll go into the community hall and everybody can come in and see it. You could go in and see the pictures and the drawings for what that super duper 100 million, 200 rooms, it's a 200 room hotel. You missed that out. I mean, that's crazy. They're going to spend 100. I mean, how much was 100 million? And they never even spent that when Fergus did the stadium, 3 years later.
So again, and I suppose I'm repeating myself here, but are you and Donald, tasked with writing headlines and narrative that you just don't buy into? But it's just your job at the end of the day? Yeah,
but every journalist is. Every journalist is. Because if you work for the Daily Mail, are you going to write about the great contribution that migrants make to this country? That how Nigel Farage is a racist? No, you're no.
I suppose, if this is your world, I suppose that's a conflict that a lot of journalists face. I mean, some journalists would say...
Almost every journalist.
Some journalists would say, well, I just can't work for that title anymore. Did you ever get to that point where you were being asked to write things that just didn't resonate and you thought...
Well, I did. That's why, and bizarrely, I was in the court the next day, back to that week, and Steve Sampson got a phone call from Michael Kelly. So he said, I take it you're sacking the right? That was... and Steve Sampson says, no, you can't do that. Because remember, this is the old board are still in charge. Mm-hmm. They hadn't fallen apart yet. And I didn't know they were falling apart, but I thought, I want no part of it. Mm-hmm. He said, you can't do that. He said, I've worked for the Sun. He said, he'll be on the front page tomorrow. That you'll make him a martyr. Wait for a few days, then sack him.
This is Steve Sampson's advice
Steve
to Michael
Sampson,
Kelly.
because he'd been the editor at the Scottish Sun, Steve Sampson, so he knew the terrain. He knew of which he spoke.
Yeah, so your sacking was in the post.
So my sacking was in the post.
Everything changed, as we'll get to that week, that week of the 4th of March. Before we do get to the pivotal day, this whole series focuses on 4th of March 1994, the takeover some 30 years ago. But all the while, while all this is going on, stadium, Kellys, Whites, everything else in the background, Brian Dempsey in, Brian Dempsey out. All the while, there's a lot of noise in the background, engineered by supporters groups such as Save Our Celts, initially with guys like Willie Wilson and Jim Orr, and we've had Jim in the chair. And then obviously the subsequent supporters group is Celts for Change. That's Matt McGlone, Brendan Sweeney, David Cunningham, and others. What was the feeling or the opinions of these supporters groups from inside the club? And again, how were you advised, if that's the right word, to report on that, if at all? Did you mention supporters groups in any way, shape or form in the View?
One of my proudest moments, it's not quite that, but one of my proudest moments in the early years was when the View celebrated its 25 years. So it would be 1990. And I wrote a piece about how it became the institution, and it was, and I managed to get Not the View in the piece, and it was the first ever mention of Not the View. But my memory, and it's very fuzzy over all this, they were seen as the barbarians at the gates, weren't they? Like Save Our Celts and Celts for Change. Although I attended, my brother was saying to me, we were at one of these meetings. I think it was maybe Jim Orr's group, so it would be Save Our Celts. And Jim Orr had letters printed in the View. He had certain dialogues. So I think the Celts for Change was a bit different, and we were seen really as propping up the unacceptable, justifying the unjustifiable, which I can understand any supporters feeling that way and feeling really resentful towards us.
There was obviously, between Save Our Celts and Celts for Change, a number of events, rallies, publicity stunts, more under Celts for Change than Save Our Celts. Famously, and we've covered that a lot in this series, Save Our Celts had that inaugural meeting at Shettleston Town Hall, which I think was February 1991, if I've got that right.
My brother says we were, my brother was telling me the other day that we were definitely there. We went. But I was at another one, I remember another one, and Dempsey turned up late. Deliberately, it felt like to me. So the doors burst open at the back. It's like one of those Wild West things.
I think this was after the takeover. I've heard this story. I think this was after the 4th of March, maybe a week after.
I don't think I would have gone to anything like that.
So I'll need to check with other guests. I'm sure Jim Orr tells the story. That was it. The fruit market, or down at the Candleriggs Hall. I'm sure it was meant to be a rally, and it ended up being a celebration because things had changed at that point. We'll check the notes on that, but not to worry. I was just going to ask though.
Then he walked up the middle of the aisle
with the scarf on,
and it was somebody said to him, "Here we are, the pious pontiff." That was one of the nicknames given to him, the pious pontiff.
So we'll check. We'll do a fact check on ourselves on that one. But in terms of, as I say, so quite famously that meeting at Shettleston Town Hall.
There was two. I'm sure there was two meetings at Shettleston Town Hall.
Well, let's go with the inaugural one, the big one where Joe Beltrami chairs it. Brian Dempsey speaks passionately. I'm sure Willie Wilson speaks. I think Jerry Dunbar of Not the View, who's been in, he spoke, and also Jimmy Farland, Tom Grant are in attendance. So you've got two Celtic directors in attendance. Do you recall? And I suppose I'm asking to you to rack back in your memory, but do you recall if you had to then report on that meeting, and if so, how do you report on such a meeting, which is basically a protest against how the club is being run?
I don't know if we did report on it. I do remember, what European game was it? We were over in Europe and I was sitting beside Jimmy. Loved old Jimmy Farrell. And he whispered over at me, "I got to get rid of these guys."
What guys?
The board, the rest of the board. He was the kind of fifth columnist. And they tried to get rid of him. There was all these EGMs. There was some mad EGM, that went on at the early hours of the morning. They were crazy.
So let's take it to that week, the all-important week at the beginning of March 1994. We've covered the boycott. So the boycott is on a Tuesday night, the 1st of March. It's a rescheduled game. I think Weather had put paid to it when it was meant to be. So it was rescheduled Tuesday, 1st of March. It's against Kilmarnock at home. Tommy Burns lined up for Kilmarnock on the night. And the boycott is engineered by Celts for Change. They see this as the big opportunity to fire a shot at the board and highlight just how much fans had become disengaged. Famously, and Matt McGlone tells this story, they arranged for a market research company to stand with clickers at the gates and click every fan that went in. I think they recorded the number is 8,225 fans. The board report it as 10,000 plus. And those numbers are important because 10,000 was deemed the break-even point to make Celtic sustainable and profitable and all those things. If the attendances slipped below that, they were in trouble, and 8,000 means they're in trouble. So you've then got everything hitting the fan that time. Fergus sweeps into town from Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona. David Lowe's around, Brian Dempsey's around, and ultimately we then get Brian and Fergus outside the steps of Celtic Park. The game is over, the Rebels have won, and all of a sudden, Andrew, you've got a new boss. What is your experience like in those few days?
Well, remember, I'm at a really difficult. I'm doing like actually nearly get done for contempt of court because I worked too late one in the mornings, and the guy said to me, the clerk at the court and the policeman said, we were just about to send the helicopter out for you. He said you were that close because you hadn't turned up, for this. It was a really high profile trial. It's too complicated to explain, so I won't bother. But lasting a month, so I'm trying to do 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours at night. I'm trying to do my job and then be at the court in between times, and all the time waiting for the call that says you're sacked. Mm-hmm. so I've got a very personal kind of connection with that kind of week. Mm-hmm. But we didn't. I don't think we quite appreciated quite how completely everything was collapsing. I mean, it was utterly collapsing. Yeah, the kind of 12 minutes from midnight type idea, But then the Friday was incredible because we'd wanted it. My first day as Celtic View editor had come. Donald had left, so it'd come the end of January. Celtic played Motherwell, and it was Donald's leaving night that night at the park. And we thought this is going to be miserable because Celtic are leaving the big time. Celtic lost to Motherwell. Tommy Coyne scored the bubble in the wind header that Muggleton missed. Who had actually a good record otherwise, even though his name's associated with the depths. So they'd gone out of the Scottish Cup the earliest point in 18 years, and we had a ball that night because we thought the old board are finished. Cash flow problems will get them now. Because say they'd have got through that day, and as was happening more and more often, they got Rangers at Celtic Park the next round. That would have given them the money to maybe push their way through.
So you think in January '94, Donald's leaving doing otherwise? You think the writing's on the wall then, but they managed to hold on till the March?
We thought, we were thinking that was. You kind of thought there was an inevitability about it. They kind of thought they'd staved off that inevitability by the very fact that they'd got Geffenor in tow. And in fairness to Michael Kelly, we maybe didn't go on, but I mean, in terms of back when you're talking earlier about that, the April one and the November one. When it came to the November one, they'd moved to Cambuslang. I remember meeting him and he said, how do you feel now, Andrew? Because I could tell you were sceptical over that last one. Mm-hmm. Are you on board with us now? Do you believe it now? I went, I want to believe it. Mm-hmm. I want to believe it. That's all you can say in those instances.
Yeah, you just don't know, do you?
Yeah, you don't want to see your club. You don't want to see your club going to oblivion. You don't want to see your club losing its relevance. And that's what was happening.
Yeah. The big night, of course, so 4th of March, as I mentioned, Fergus and Brian outside the front doors with their big announcement. And they'd obviously spent the prior few hours hammering out the details. Michael Kelly exits, David Smith, who had joined the board, exits. All those things were happening. Where were you at that time? Were you in the building?
We were all in the Walford with the other press. We were waiting for it all to kind of shake down, and then we'd see. Because remember, Tom Grant and Jack McGinn, in fairness to them, they helped smooth the way because they sided with Fergus, and that's they got effectively they opened the door for Fergus, and that was but my memory again, it's a private one. So I was running up the stairs. I had to go down toilet or something like that. I had to, and it was just at the time Michael Kelly was coming out. And remember, I'd said, this board are leading the club to oblivion. Actually, Ewing toned it down. He said, I wanted to try and give you some kind of. I said, you don't need to tone my down. I mean, how often does anybody in the Sun tone down the words of a guy who's ranting? Mm-hmm. But he said, I just wanted to give you some possible out. So he, I went and said, this board, they're like as I say, like, we're going to be, the club's going to mean nothing, lose its entire relevance. They don't have a clue. They don't know what they're doing. And so I was at the bottom of the stairs, if you can imagine the foyer, and Kelly was coming out. Michael Kelly was coming out, and he pointed down to me. I trusted you. And I thought, you always want to come up with a killer line, and I went, oh.
Great line.
Because I couldn't think of anything.
And that was that. And was that the last you seen Michael Kelly? Give or take.
Yeah, I've never spoken to him since.
That was it.
That wasn't even me speaking to him. That was our last interaction.
Yeah. You've mentioned there, so you're there in the Walford when it's all going on and it's all playing out, and as I say, Fergus is ironing out the details. Dominic Keane joins the board at that time. Brian Dempsey's back at the club after being ousted in October 1990. Do you get any one-to-ones or interviews with those guys, keeping in mind that you've still got a business as usual? The View's coming out the next Wednesday. Did you manage to get good headlines?
So the next morning, before they headed off to Perth,
to lose, did they lose 1-0 in Perth?
No, they won. Paul Byrne. They lost the first home game.
That's what it'll be. Yeah.
The following week, 39 people, and Fergus walked round the stadium, and then the following Thursday, they played Wraith Rovers at home, and Simon Donnelly made his debut and scored twice. And there was only 17,000 at it, and I remember Fergus next day saying, what happened to the other 22,000? I thought they said it was all about. I said, Fergus, without success, people don't stick with you. So all these people said, I wasn't going back to that board, went away. So the new board came in, and it was like, well, I'll go back once. It was like, because I know I've got an unpopular take in all this. Celtic were as badly run in 87, 88, when they were getting 70,000 for a day winning the league, as they were in 93, 94. They weren't any... There hadn't been a deterioration in the governance or whatever. They were as badly run. The difference was they weren't successful. So I have I know, sure, Matt and Jim Orr and whoever think I'm talking out my bahookie, but it isn't fan groups that get rid of boards. It's results. Everything comes down to results in football, because only Not the View saw it in 86, 87, that this was not the model. This was not the kind of the corporate structure needed for going into the 21st century. They saw it with Not the View and the way that they presented it, but there wasn't any of these fan groups protesting. Have you ever seen a fan group protesting when clubs win trophies?
No, certainly not. But to contradict that, you say results, and obviously results are essentially the most important thing in football. But even if the club were getting good results, that doesn't magic up a new stadium. There was a bigger issue at play there, and the Celtic board seemed unable to deal with that situation at that time, regardless how the team were doing.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have had the people manning the barricades. That would not have had the people manning the barricades, because they weren't doing anything about, I suppose, Hillsborough changed things. Yeah, I admit that. But do you think if Celtic had been winning the league in 93, do you think if Celtic had won the league in 93, there'd have been all these protests?
Probably not, but we ended up with this perfect storm, and that's exactly what's
we did, but
out.
That's different. That's a different to say that, and it was great. The guys did what they did, and it was necessary and important, but it wasn't what ultimately triggered the demise of the old board.
What was the straw that broke the camel's back, in your opinion?
Well, I was told, I know people dispute it, I think they say it was Willie Faulkner. I get told that when they signed Lee Martin in the January, it went to a tribunal, and Celtic expected, I think, to pay 250, 275, and it went to 400 or something of that ilk. And they didn't have the money. They didn't. Michael Kelly will tell you forever, like it was cash flow. I mean, I used to see it. We used to get all the newspapers. There was a wee, probably it didn't exist in your time going to Celtic, but there used to be wee news agents at the foot
at the end of Kerrydale Street.
Of Kerrydale Street.
Yeah.
And the wee guy, and he was almost kind of hanging on to me saying, can you get them to pay? Because we all got the newspapers from the early 90s. Celtic View got a whole set of every newspaper, and we kept cuts. The secretary got a whole set of newspapers. But at the start of 94, they stopped paying this wee guy. He actually shut. He shut. I know people go on about Rangers and face painters and all that. He shut down because Celtic didn't pay him. There was a butcher. There was a butcher up at Parkhead Cross. Again, they just weren't paying. They weren't paying. They weren't to settle up the invoices. So it was just coming crashing.
And this was all just the old board. There's a story, isn't there, that after Fergus takes over, there's an audit. I think Dominic Keane was overseeing the audit, and they were literally opening drawers, and there's bills and invoices and all sorts of stuff. Let's get to Fergus then. So obviously he takes over 4th of March 1994. In those early days, of course it's important for Fergus to get his message across to the fans. He's the new man in charge, and and here's my vision type thing. I think it's fair to say though there was also a distrust of the media at that time. So how important was it for Fergus to get the message out through the Celtic View and ultimately through what you were doing as editor at that time?
I don't know if that perception's entirely correct, I have to say, because what was the first thing I was at with Fergus after that Friday night? It was another meet and greet with the press, and was it the Hilton or something on the Saturday morning? I went along. We weren't even invited really, but I just thought, well, we should be there like everybody else. And it was like, remember, I'm still in my court case. So then he come round to meet everybody in the club on the Monday. And Joe said, actually, the editor's not here because he's in jury duty. He said, I think I met him on Saturday, the snappy dresser, because I was a bit slovenly, You can see I'm like a really struggling note to go into, kind of. So, but on the Sunday night, I'd spent an hour on the phone to him. I'd spent an hour on the phone to him Sunday night because we'd asked punters to send in questions. We'd manned a phone. Steve Sampson, a very tabloid idea. They'd somebody on the phone, and they said, phone in between. It's like the kind of prototype hotline.
The hotline, yeah.
Phone in, and then I had to ask Fergus these 22 questions.
Okay.
And he never got back to me, 12 o'clock in the Sunday night, and I'm asking him all these questions. Some of the questions are, I can't really see from my seat, da-da-da-da. And he's going, he was an irascible character at the best of times. He's going, I'm not answering any more stupid questions. I've had a long day.
And you need to go to print on the Monday, the morning after.
Yeah.
What was it like? I know you'll have various kind of stories and various interactions with him, but what was he like in the one-on-ones? Was he as direct and to the point as everyone says he was, or could he also be humorous and light at different times?
Oh yeah, he was funny. He was a bit incorrigible, and sometimes blunt to an incredible degree. He didn't have any bedside manner about him. That's what you might say. No bedside manner to him, but he had a really dry and a really acerbic wit. Like when I did a Celtic miscellany, and actually that's the last kind of interaction, and the things that I said in it, Michael Kelly wrote to the Herald because they used some of the comments that Fergus McCann had come out with about Kelly and all that, and he said, and he had a real go at me because I didn't know what a Maris brother was, even though I'm a church-going Catholic. I thought it was a monk. I thought a Maris brother was a monk, but they're not quite that. That order. I don't really know what they are. I'd still even to this day. But Michael Kelly, these are the kind of things that like he would snort at. You don't know what a Maris brother is. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's pick up again in terms of Fergus. So one of the most important things, Andrew, was the share issue, which was taking part in early 1995. As you mentioned there, results are the all-important things for fans. Fans are excited and optimistic about this new era under Fergus. The prospect of stopping Rangers from overtaking the 9-0 record that was set by Jock Stein's all-conquering Celtic teams of the 60s and 70s. But success definitely wasn't instant, and in fact we lost a League Cup final to Wraith Rovers a little over 6 months into his reign, so that was November 1994. But shortly after this, in early 1995, Fergus floats the club on the London Stock Exchange, and it turns out to be one of the most successful share issues in British football, generating some £21 million for the club. That would then provide working capital for the redevelopment of Celtic Park as well as for the first team squad. Was there anxiety from Fergus or others in the building in the build-up to this share issue? As I say, it's the most important thing, that he was overseeing. Or was Fergus always confident that it would be as well received as it ultimately turned out to be?
They talk about Fergus McCann as a visionary, and two things to me leap out that prove that. The share issue, that he stuck to his guns in the share issue. I remember going to see him on the Monday, the day after, the night after the League Cup final, and because I used to go and see him on a Monday, with like a kind of.
Would you see him on a weekly basis?
I did at that time, and then he stopped because he said I wasn't writing down what he was saying. So he says, "Get me Joe." I said, "I'm not a secretary. I'm interviewing you. I'm a journalist. I'm not just a Celtic lackey." So I was kind of pushed aside for Joe's maybe more compliant, and Joe would maybe agree with that. I hope he wouldn't take issue because I love Joe bits. But that Monday I said, Fergus, I said, people think you're just in it for the business. I said, they don't really appreciate that you're feeling it as a supporter as much as anything. And he said, shout, as he would, you can imagine the way he would say it. He said, I'm sitting there in Ibrox and I'm sweating bullets. I'm sweating bullets, man. And I said, do you not think maybe you should delay it? It's your issue. No. And we all thought in there, we thought, it's going to be a disaster. And it was oversubscribed by 100%. You never saw him happier than that night, and rightly so. My God, what a vindication. And Michael Kelly had said, this is going to be a disaster. Michael Kelly. So I asked Joe, it was the Monday night it closed. I said, Joe, go down and ask him what he thinks of Michael Kelly's comments now. And he said, and this is a phrase I'd never heard, but it's been used subsequently. He says, the dog barks, but the caravan moves on. And I said, what? That's our front page. That is our front page. Fergus says, don't want you to use that. Don't want you to use that. I said, Joe, you got on well with Fergus. Go down and ask him again. Played with him. This is going to be great. And he eventually relented, so that was our front page for the Wednesday.
That was the View front page?
That was the front page splash.
I wonder if a young Pedro Caixinha was looking at your headlines at that time, because he obviously used it in more recent times. But as you say, he's absolutely vindicated. He could have taken the advice of others and sat tight and held back on the share issue, but ultimately he stuck to his guns. He believed in what he was doing. And as we've mentioned there, it was the most successful share issue in British football, generating 21 million. What was the fans feeling around Fergus at that time? Is he still in the honeymoon period? Is he still deemed as a saviour?
No, it's all gone, because
I said this is.
It's hard to articulate how miserable the Hampden season was, because they had to move to Hampden because see, before they did that, I said, you shouldn't be doing this. I said, I've worked it out. Showed them all the figures for the average attendances for the last 20 years. It's never gone beyond 35. You only get 30. You only get more than 35 if Celtic play Rangers. So you can just take the hit on that. You could bolt on the seats, similar to what they did at Hampden. I thought that's what Celtic should have done. Shows you how much I know. And he went, 60,000. I said, why do you need 60,000?
And there's the thing. So whether it's
so that's the visionary. 60,000 stadium and the share issue, which financed the entire revival. One of my memories is we were in the main building, and this guy comes along he looks like kind of your man Terry Thomas for Magnificent Men and his flying machine, right? The actor.
No.
With these two wee kids. Yeah, the older viewers. And this is Dermot Desmond. He's willing to put some money in. Oh, right. Fergus wants you to interview him. So Joe took him to the next kind of lounge. And I always remember he was just walking along with his two, I don't know if it was two boys or whatever, he's walking along. And then we come back and we did this big piece with him, and he said, I'm not just doing this for emotional reasons. He said, this is good business.
This is Dermot Desmond.
This was Dermot Desmond. Because I think that would that have been before? You'd need to maybe check it. That would have been before the offer closed for the supporters. I think Fergus saw it as like, here's a guy that knows what he's talking about with business. Because Fergus famously, when Brian Quinn, from former kind of deputy of the Bank of England, when he joined, and I spoke to Brian Quinn, and Brian Quinn just wanted to talk about Charlie Tully, right? He just wanted to talk about Charlie Tully because these guys, because he was a Celtic supporter. So I said, so my intro was lifelong Celtic fan, Brian Quinn, and wee Fergus said that he wanted to see the piece. He didn't see all the pieces, although I used to go down to his house on a Sunday night to take him some of the pages before Peter McLean was appointed as a PR man. And after we get sued, he thought, well, somebody else will need to be doing this, because even he couldn't trust himself in a way, because it wasn't as if he didn't see that stuff we get sued for. It was like he thought that's fine, and I thought that was fine in my naivety. But anyway, so I sent over the piece of Brian Quinn, and I'd started it, tabloidy fashion, lifelong Celtic fan, Brian Quinn, realised I dreamed it. And it come back, lifelong had been scored out, and it said, and Fergus had written above it, world-renowned businessman Brian Quinn.
Just changing the tone.
Yeah, because he was in awe of Brian Quinn with some of these. So Patrick Shea, if you remember some of these guys from Bat Industries, which, let's not go there about what they do, in terms of British, British Allied Tobacco, isn't it? They're up to all sorts. Well, but these guys, but he could attract that calibre. I mean, and no offence to Jack, and I'm really fond of Jack, I'm really fond of Tom Grant, and even Michael. I'm not fond of Michael Kelly, but I just mean in terms of, look at where that was pitched, and then you've got guys like Brian Quinn and Sir Patrick Shea and all that. I mean, you can't argue with I don't like their world, I don't like what they represent, but you're pitching it an entirely different. Well, actually, I don't think they're necessarily got that calibre now.
I mean, I think even the old board, if they were honest with themselves, would concede that this new board was just a higher bracket of business type. At the time. You mentioned, Sir Patrick Sheehy and Brian Quinn, who came in subsequently, ended up as chairman as well. I think the breakdown of the 21 million that was raised, 9 million was put in by the fans, 4 million by Dermot Desmond. That's the start of his
He
move.
initially thought he was only going to put 2 million in. He came over, spoke to Fergus and went, whoa, you're really selling this to me. He doubled his own stake.
And that again shows Fergus's belief in that vision, that he's doubled up. 2 million becomes 4 million. Yeah. And there'll be various other stories. I think Fergus and other business types put in the remaining 8 million. So hugely successful at that time. But ultimately, as I say, fans want success, so it's great. That there's a bit of stability, there's now money to play with, we can redevelop the stadium, but ultimately fans want to win, and to be really pointed, they want to stop Rangers breaking the 9-in-a-row record. But it certainly doesn't come overnight. The title still eludes us. We do go on to win the Scottish Cup in May 1995, back at Hampden. Pierre Van Hooydonk 1-0 win over Airdrie. Many fans are clamouring for Fergus to splash the cash at that time, but it's just not his style. Tommy Burns and him famously clashed over that. Tommy and Fergus, they were always destined to fall out, because Tommy's focus, rightfully so, as the football guy and the manager and the Celtic fan, I suppose, was to bring success on the pitch. Fergus, and you've mentioned that, the vision of Fergus, his focus, and also rightfully so, was to give Celtic the stadium and the infrastructure and the security in the future that were the remit of his role. And those two don't go hand in hand, because Tommy needed money to buy players, and ultimately he fell, just short of lifting the title. And you wonder, and it's been asked if Fergus might, reconsider this himself, with just a wee bit more of a push, Celtic might have had the quality to stop Rangers before they did.
Well, Billy Stark will tell you that. They were certainly close. And as I say, the 96-97 season was I always describe it as the most fun you can have without winning in it. They were dynamic. They were devastating.
Yeah.
some of these, like when they rolled over the top of teams, it was exhilarating. It really was. Van Hooydonk and his pomp and such like, you know.
George Cadetti.
Sorry, 95, 96. Sorry, I'm getting my season. I'm one season out. 95, 96.
So Tommy Burns, just to stay on Tommy for a moment. So Tommy Burns was and always will be a Celtic legend, and he eventually moves on at the end of the 96-97 season, having just fallen short league-wise. Did you find that kind of thing hard to deal with, taking it back to you and your role at that time, editor of the Celtic View? I'm sure, and as you've kind of leaned towards there, I'm sure you, like most of us, extremely fond of Tommy Burns as a Celtic guy, but also a job to do. Are you then, again, going back to this similar question, are you conflicted if you get your Celtic fan hat on at times, but also your professional hat on in terms of how you have to report?
Well, that was the next time I resigned.
All right,
but I didn't do it officially because Merrill talked me out of it. So it's one of my great regrets in a way. So obviously I'd been up all night watching Portillo lose and all that. Watching this was Labour were getting swept into power, and I was up all night, ensuring that I could remain up all night with all sorts of beverages, you know. So then I got a phone call from Merrill. Said, "You better." I'd arranged to take the Friday off. "You better come in here because it's all Tommy's gone." So then I had to be in by about 4 o'clock in the evening, and it was like. I was also writing on the QT for the Irish News. I was their Scottish football correspondent, so I had to do a piece on that. But we were devastated. I struggled with Tommy. Tommy was my hero growing up. Tommy was my absolute hero. My pictures on the wall of Shoot and Match and Scoop, they were all Tommy's file on Tommy Burns. And he was always used to look at, it was brilliant, like who person you'd most like to meet, the Pope. You know, it was like my mum idolised Tommy Burns because he represented something in us that kind of conjoined kind of faith in your football. The day my mum died, the day of her funeral, I said, you can sum up my mum's life in 3 F's: her faith, her family, her football. And one of the McStays died about 6 months later. And Cannon McGinn stole it. He said you can sum up the 3 F's: faith, family, football. You could sum up Tommy: faith, family, football. So we're all of the... But maybe it was, I don't know, I just didn't quite... I was the editor then, and I think... And I was kind of... I maybe took the board side a lot more because I could see the bigger picture. Whereas Merrill and Joe were much closer. They were in and around the players. Well, once you're the editor, you have to take a step back, and you're not writing it all the time. You know, you're not writing everything, so you're not as involved with the players. You're more involved with the executives. It's just like I said about Donald would be the one speaking to Michael Kelly. So I was maybe seen as a board man, and I always remember 95 on that. Just quickly, sorry, when we come back to the Celtic Park, and Fergus was just standing there because we knew that the kind of divisions between him and Tommy were really severe, and they all exploded, if you remember, the next couple of days later. But Fergus was standing there himself, and I'd had a few scoops, and I went up and I hugged him. You've never seen a guy that recoiling more from being hugged. And I said, this is your triumph too, because nobody was talking about him.
After the 95 Scottish Cup final.
And he left. He left about 2 minutes later. I thought, what have I done? What have I done? He's not a guy that seemed comfortable with affection. There was nothing warm and fuzzy about Fergus. It's just his way.
Yeah, do you know, just to go over it again, you know, a lot of folks say, the various folks I've spoken to as part of this series, they've all had relationships of sorts with Fergus in different ways, and that's between, like, Hugh Keevins was close with him at times, you know, before the takeover. Brian Dempsey was certainly close at a point, although that didn't work out. Jock Brown, who we spoke to, who worked, you know, around those times in 97, he worked in close quarters. Tom Grant for a time as stadium manager, and I've potentially missed a couple of folks out, but you know, they've all had different relationships with him, and some say he was straight to the point, but they liked that. You know, that was fine for getting a message across. Some say that he could be very humorous, and it's always interesting to hear that because as fans, you never really got that. There's no clips of Fergus McCann being humorous in public. You know, there's none of that. That you've mentioned there was no warm fuzzy stuff, but could he have a warmth about him? Would he be compassionate at times when required, or was that just something you never seen?
Do you know, like, he could be very, very funny. Like, you know, it was like people would say to him, but football's a business, you can't be principled. It's like, he was going nuts one day because Tommy told him he wanted Gordon Petrich, and he said, so much is Gordon Petrich worth? He said 1.2 million. So they went to 1.3, I think, or what was 1.1. They went to 1.3, and then Rangers went to 1.4, and they never got him right. And Tommy went nuts at him, and he goes, but you told me he was worth so much. I paid more. I was willing to pay more. But somebody was willing to pay more. What do you want me to do? He says, no, you have to get him. No. And it was Rico Annoni. He wouldn't pay just before Celtic were playing, I think it was Wraith Rovers in a Scottish Cup quarter final. And there was haggling over Rico Annoni, like 250, 300, 350, And I remember Fergus saying, if we can't beat Wraith Rovers without Rico Annoni, we're in real trouble. But but he had some wit, because he would quote with Pygmalion, the George Bernard Shaw kind of, it was used for My Fair Lady. It was like, principles, sir, sorry, I can't afford them, And I remember he quoted for the end of the Treasure of Sierra Madre with Humphrey Bogart. What does it gain for a man if he earns all the gold in the world but loses his soul? He was a learned, clever guy. You
lost me at Pygmalion, to be honest with you.
Oh, sorry.
I'll take your word for it. No, there's no doubt. Obviously, a very smart guy.
Do you know that one of his great ones, and I mean, he was wickedly funny. So that Rico Annoni, when he was getting badgered about that, I remember press conference, and he come in and he was sitting down in the boardroom, and he says, hey, will I put my head in my hands first so as you can get your pictures, guys? And somebody said to him, you in crunch talks? He said, why the talks always crunch? I said, why can't it just be talks?
Yeah, smart guy, very unique individual, no doubt about it. Andrew, the 1997-98 season, as we all know now, would see Wim Janssen's Celtic lift the title and finally stop Rangers' charge towards 10 in a row. Henrik Larsson and Harold Bratback are obviously the heroes on that day in May 1998. At the early part of that season, we said farewell to some high-profile Celtic figures: Paul McStay, Di Canio, George Cadetti, and Andrew Smith of the Celtic View. You obviously make that move at that time. What led you to making that move? You've mentioned there was a couple of times where you thought the writing was on the wall, a couple of times you potentially were going to resign and never went ahead with it. Why did you make the move at that time, and how do you reflect now on those 8 and a bit years at Celtic Park?
It was amazing. I wished I'd got what I got in that last season just a couple of years before. We'd gone to a magazine, and it was a terrific production, if I do say so myself. You can look back in some of those. Our early magazines were really, we were really kind of hitting our stride in terms of what we could do, and we had a whole new set of players, so it felt so fresh. But I got the opportunity to work in the Evening Times. To be honest with you, I was increasing my wage by 50% and reducing my hours by about 30%. And I remember that day, I think I mentioned earlier, I went down to see Vim, and it was awful doing his programme notes. He wouldn't talk about individuals, he wouldn't talk about opponents. I said, what do you expect us to fill this column with? Vim, he just, and he said, why are you leaving? I said, I'm getting so much more money. And he said, never do anything for money. I said, I'm only joking, Vim. I said, I need a new opportunity. This is a wider canvas on which to paint on. And he put his arm around me. I'll never forget it. He put his arm around me. He said, that's the right answer.
Okay.
That's the right answer.
Just quickly, and I wasn't planning on asking anything about Wim Jansen. He will always be revered amongst the fan base as a hero for stopping the 10 and what he'd done that season. But I think it's okay as well to say that he could be difficult at times, and there's a Jock Brown insight into that. Jock Brown absolutely respected Wim Jansen, but they had a very challenging relationship. From your experience, did you find them hard at times? Any take on that?
He was a kind of no-mate kind of figure. He was okay with us because we weren't the executives. He couldn't abide Jock because Jock he wanted his coterie to be a football coterie. He adored Davy Hay, him and Davy, because they were of a certain ilk.
Yeah.
Jock was an outsider.
Yeah, it was Vim, Murdo, McLeod and Davy Hay were the kind of triumvirate.
Yeah, and also he didn't like, I remember that day, and I was like so much, I remember writing in the Evening Times, I said, like all the geezers in Iceland haven't slung as much mud the Celtic and Wim Jansen these last few days. Because remember, he held a press conference after he'd resigned. He'd come back to Glasgow and he held a press conference. It was a Friday. I always remember it. And they were going on about, it was Fergus held the press conference in town, and he rubbled Jansen because he told them, he wanted them to say, you have to put your players in rankings. So A, you keep, B, you wouldn't mind keeping, could be, C, we get rid of. And he said, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing anything like that. Which Romanov later did at Hearts, actually. He just kind of copied it. Which I think that's what, you need to know if you're running a business. They tried to put him into a business kind of straitjacket. Wim Jansen, there's these football people, they don't think necessarily as literally as that. And Fergus couldn't think as laterally as your standard football person. So they were polar opposites.
I was just about to say that there's those inevitable clashes, and we've seen it, over the years in football, and they'll continue in the years ahead, whether it's Tommy Burns and Fergus McCann, whether it's Wim Jansen and Jock Brown. Football guys and business guys think differently, but they're forced together just by the modern game, and it's inevitable. Sometimes you've got these fallouts. Andrew, just as we're heading towards the end of the recording, when we spoke to Hugh Keevins earlier in the series, he described that era in Celtic as the most exciting time of his professional career. If you were to sum it up in a similarly short way, what would you say? Exciting, emotional, stressful, or anything else?
It was great. It was it was really difficult at times, really stressful at times, but it was like you felt you were living. It was in some ways pre-Fergus, it was like a Trump presidency. There was something that happened every hour, it seemed to be. So it was always exciting and exhilarating, but sometimes it was like a car crash.
I suppose the alternative would be plain sailing. 8 years of, things are fine, ticking along, and maybe that wouldn't have been quite as much fun. Andrew, any final thoughts as we start to wrap this one up?
No, it was a privilege. It was a privilege to be there. It was a privilege to have the kind of, to be so close to the most, it's not the most, as I say, it's one of the least successful periods in that, but it's monumental. And all those days will live with me. And things like Lou Macari allowing me to go to the dressing room, for when the fan band game and all that. That's one of the, outside of my weightings and my marriage, my wedding day, that's maybe one of my favourite days. And some of the times I played in the band, but it was like, wow, I'm really in the inner sanctum here.
Yeah, just absolutely incredible times in Celtic history. Andrew, finally, a huge thanks for joining us here on the Celtic Exchange today, for being kind with your time and for sharing your own unique experiences from that extraordinary time in Celtic history. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and all the very best for whatever's next.
Thanks very much.